My guest on this episode is my friend and actor and fellow comedian Jason Salmon. You might know Jason from a number of things. He's been on 30 Rock and Orange is the New Black. He also has a dry bar special that has done an enormous amount of views. He's been the face and voice of NAPA Auto Parts, and he's been in the game Red Dead Redemption 2. Yeah, that hit game. He's here right now to talk about his brand new comedy special coming out very, very soon. Please join me for a wide-ranging conversation with Jason Salmon. So when you do this, tell me what's the business plan for Jason Salmon the comedian?
Well, first of all, the business plan is to understand that Jason Salmon the comedian does not understand business. The most successful people in the world, if you look at it closely, are great salesmen. I'm a terrible salesman, even with myself, and I love myself. And I'm still like, somebody's like, no, and I'm like, oh, I get it. Like this is why my entire dating life was built on aggressive women. I mean, that was it. This is my entire model is like, sit back.
I need someone to take me off the shelf. I can't sell myself.
I do. I am not a salesman for cereal. I am a box of Cheerios is what I am. That's who I am. That's my persona. I know that. I know I'm not good at it. So knowing that, I'm like, all right, I just have to prepare myself to get tons of rejections. And so I'm like, all right, that's what I'm just going to do. And I'm going to see what happens. But more than that, I wanted to, I had this material I was working on. I've got a 12-minute bit on being Generation X. And it's just like stuff that I'm just like, this was fun. This was like the comedy. I love the comedy of it. And I did sort of the same thing you're talking about doing is I toured it through the summer. I recorded it in October, and knew that the holidays were coming up and all that stuff was going on. So I let everybody, I'm just sort of like, let's try to see what we can put together in the remainder of October, in the first part of November. And then we'll let everybody go for the holidays. We'll come back after the holidays, and because we weren't going to release it before the end of the year anyway. Not. So I had talked to them about that, and they're like, no, that's stupid. And I'm like, you're right, that's stupid. Because this is the thing. I don't put much of a fight up. I'm like, I am stupid sometimes. They've got a point. So that's my, my
you guys
problem,
got me.
Yeah, my problem is you can talk me out of my success real fast. But I know that. So I was like, all right. So we set it up. So I knew that, all right, we're looking for, and I was like, it's an interesting special. There's like a twist at the end. There's like a little bit something different in it. I was like, this is cool. I think it's a cool little setup. And we did it at a new a dude in Pennsylvania produces a lot of shows, did a ton of shows during the pandemic, had a whole outdoor facility. He had just bought a new indoor facility. It's like a barn type thing.
What?
And I was like, oh, this is totally the look that I want to go for. so I
Manger comedy.
So it is. I mean, like legitimately, if you like the best I'm going to do in comedy is not to like sell stuff and do all this stuff. The best I'm going to do is give birth to a comedy Jesus Christ. And then people are like, and people find him in a barn and they're like, oh yeah, that kid that was born in the barn.
There were animals everywhere.
That's going to stick with us for a while. That's my comedy business model. Which is a terrible business model to be like, I just hope somebody finds this like religious text.
Well, so it's a terrible business model.
Yes.
However, it's a wonderful way to be an artist.
Yeah, no, I'm happy. Here's the thing. All the stuff I told you about my success and my lack thereof, I'm happy. I love what I do, and I get to do it all the time, and people pay me money.
We'll get into your acting stuff and your comedy stuff and your VO stuff and all that. But what's success then? What's the metric by which you measure all of this up against? You know what I mean? You're happy.
Yeah.
And that's a nebulous feeling. Is there sort of an actual line that you measure, a ruler by which you measure your happiness and success?
I would say that there's not a certain ruler. Like most people measure their happiness in very nebulously, and they measure their success very specifically. I've been detoured so many times that I'm like, I'm not going to give myself a line because legitimately most of my acting success has come from being, oh, the guy we want's not can't do it. Can you do it? And I'm like, yeah, I can do it. I mean, like,
hey, availability is a skill set.
Legitimately, I have realized that proximity and availability is the. I mean, that's how I used to date. I'm like, if you're here and available, you're on my list. I would love to get to know you more. You know.
Well, does all of that help though? Not like force you into other things you don't want to do? Because I know if I'm paying constant attention to, oh, I got to do this, and they need this, and they need this, and if I'm worried about selling myself, I think a lot more about what I'm trying to sell versus when I hole up in my introverted little pocket. I'm not opening the door for a month.
Yeah.
What I end up making ends up being so much cooler than what I probably would have done if I won't say if I cared, but if I cared.
Yeah, I find that the best stuff that I do tends to be stuff that I do when I'm like, I don't care if anybody likes this because I like it. And it's interesting to me. The things that interest me without a sales pitch involved in it. Look, don't get me wrong. I've said the word algorithm. I can't even say it. I've said the word algorithm
incorrectly
more than any word this year. I guarantee you, I've said it more than I've said anything. But I mean, I understand the world as it exists, and that you have to do certain things to pursue. You have to have avenues to pursue.
But do
money.
you go? So how far down that road do you go? Are you into the whole social media clips every day? Like, what's your social activity look like?
I've gone through ebbs and flows of it. My social media, I post a video every Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Okay,
I do that.
Stand up.
90% stand up. I do some sketch stuff. I'm starting to work on some more sketch stuff because I realized, you know what? I love sketch stuff. I didn't do sketch stuff for a long time because that was sort of only to lead to SNL, which I will also never get. I mean, you know, it's what it is. I mean, I've been told no by so many amazing entities of comedy. People are like, oh, you did this. I just heard a podcast with Sarah Silverman, and they were talking about, oh, you were in Seinfeld, you were in Larry Sanders Show, you were in all these iconic. I'm like, oh, that's like my career, except all of those people said no to me. I mean, to be fair, I was on like some iconic shows.
You've done you've been on Orange is the New Black. You were just. Did I not see you at somewhere on? What was I watching the other day? Was it the Wu-Tang story?
Yeah, the Wu-Tang.
And
I was on Wu-Tang.
That was you.
Yes,
You son.
I was, and I was playing
Like a sound
music
guy or something?
in Houston.
Yes.
In Houston, that was what I was.
So these are great. These are great shows, and you're in good stuff.
Yes.
And is there an end game now, or is it sort of a? Because I know when I started, right? Like 20. Oh, God, it hurts to even say out loud, right? 23 years ago, Jason.
Really?
24 in April.
Wow.
Oh my God, we're almost at 24 years. No, we're almost at 23. I started in 2000. Anyway, doesn't matter.
That's all right.
An extraordinary amount of time. And I know when I started, there was this. Well, I'm gonna be the guy with the special on HBO in the first 2 years. No one's ever done. I'm gonna be all these things.
Yeah, of course.
And most of that comes from the fact that I had no idea what I was getting into.
Right.
No clue.
You don't know.
I don't know what stand-up is. I don't know what entertainment is. I'm a child
Right.
with dreams.
Right.
And then you start to learn along the way, and you sort of pick up your skills, and you go, okay, well, I'm pretty good at this, and I'm great at this, and I'm okay at this, and that's never going to work over there. you sort of, there's a point where I think, at least with me, where I go, okay, I don't know. I don't have forever left. I have I can now see with a little more clarity at some point an end.
Right.
Right? It was 65, 70, 80, 90, 100. I don't know what that is, but it's visible in a way that it wasn't when I was 20.
Right.
And now I'm kind of like, all right, there's some stuff I'm just never going to do. This isn't going to be in my life.
Yeah.
And I'm having to think of that in ways that I never had to think of that before. And because of that, I'm kind of in a place where it's like, I don't want to say it's limiting my choices, but it's sort of limiting what I think my potential end game could be just because I'm eliminating stuff. You're like, oh, well, I'm not going to have a waterfall in my living room.
I always look at it as less limiting and more narrowing. I mean, and to be fair, I being in New York from day one of me doing comedy, I have watched people who I'm like, oh, this will never be what they do. And one of those people was Pete Davidson. I remember literally we were doing late night at Broadway Comedy Club in New York City, late night sets after the real comics had gone up, and he's hosting, and we're all like good but terrible at the same time. You know, we're just trying to get in that next level. And I'm reading the book I'm Dying Up Here, which was about the 1980s comedy scene. So I'm thinking, who would be this character? Who would be this character? You know, because this was the story about them when they were young comics. Right. And so I'm looking at Pete Davidson, and in my head, I said distinctly, never SNL. Never. I mean, the guy just leaned against the wall and told jokes. I'm like, well, not SNL. But maybe a great stand-up comic, but not SNL. And then when I heard he got SNL, it was the weirdest combination of excited and, oh, I don't know anything, which in comedy you have happened to you often.
Constantly.
Often. You see something and you're like, how the heck did that happen? And I'm so glad that happened. And then other versions of all of those things. Like
it makes everything possible in a way, right? Like there's the unpredictability of it to an extent where I'll tell a joke that I just confidently know works and will be like, I'll look at just what happened in this room. What did I, after 20 something years, how did I not see that? And then two, with the people like Pete, perhaps, or others, where somebody will make it after a certain amount of time, and your brain goes, how? And then your brain goes, but if that's possible, then anything's possible. Because we don't know what they're looking for.
The weird thing is, I mean, Pete was young, and he was a good comic as he was young, and I was like, oh, I wouldn't be shocked at all if he became a famous stand-up comic.
But
SNL was like absurd to me because there was nothing to me at that point. SNL was
big physical
Will Forte and Will Ferrell. Everybody named Will. You know, I mean, Maya Rudolph. It was all these characters,
visual characters, and people completely selling it.
And I'm like, you know, if I had seen Sebastian Maniscalco on stage on that same night, I would have gone, that guy might be on SNL.
So have you completely given it up?
No, that's the whole thing. I just stopped chasing it. I don't chase things that I don't think are smart pursuits necessarily, but I don't give it up. And if I like doing sketch comedy. So if I do some sketches that, you know, somehow tracked and blew up,
made their way,
they're like, oh, we want you to be part of it. Yeah, of course.
But it's no longer the life's work. I got to be on SNL.
I mean, well, I to be fair, I was never thinking that was going to be my career path anyway, but I was always much more open to it. Like, you know, it was one of those things that I would really put together a packet for SNL there were like 4 or 5 years there where I put together some really good packets for SNL, and then it was like, okay, yeah.
How much effort goes into an SNL packet? Walk me through when you were considering it. Tell me the process of.
So sometimes it's you got a bunch of sketches that you've worked on and you've done and you've even performed, and those is sort of like, oh, I've got this stuff. I'm just going to go and rewrite them and sort of tweak them and get them ready and
modernize
put them in a pack.
Clean them up.
You know, it's great. That's easy. The most recent time I did it, I had nothing. And they're like, oh, they're taking packets in the next week for SNL. And I was like, okay. So I go and I actually was in Texas during that time. So I go sit at a Denny's for 4 hours a night for like the entire time I was in Texas for 4 nights straight. And the first night I write a half of a sketch, and I started another sketch idea, and I was just scouring notebooks for ideas that I had that might be translatable to sketches, jokes that I had that might tweak in the sketches. So I did that, and so the first night I had, at the end of 4 hours, I had a half a sketch and a start of another sketch. Second night, I write through the complete first sketch. I finish the second sketch. I get probably three-quarters of the way through the third sketch. The third night, I come back. I'm like, okay, I go back and I do a rewrite of the first sketch. I polish up the second sketch, which I thought was really good. My third sketch, I finish it. I do a fourth sketch, which is a mess. But I was like, but I've got one more night, and I come, and it was like this just uniform each night. And the thing was, by the time I got to the fourth night, you forget about this. If you're doing it all the time, which I'm not sketch writing all the time, if you're doing it all the time, your sensibility sharpens significantly. And if you are pouring not just practice and not just working on something, but deep work on something, like really delving into, like, how does this sound lyrically, and every and we're wired to view language and situations like this. Even though we do it in a stand-up way, which is vastly different from a sketch way, we still are wired to, like, piece together these puzzles. It's just that this puzzle is a physical three-dimensional puzzle, instead of a different kind of puzzle. It's a Rubik's Cube versus some sort of, like, pyramid style.
Yeah, whatever
Cube,
that game is they played on Star Trek.
Yeah, I don't know.
6 layers of chess.
I realized going into this metaphor, I should have known more specific puzzle games, but that's the story of my life. I start it, and I'm like, this should end well, and it doesn't. And so tomorrow I'll come back, and I'll tell this story, and there will be so many good puzzle references. That's how I work.
What makes a great sketch? As you're sitting there at a Denny's and you're pouring over something, how do you know there's a nugget of something? Like, what triggers you? How do you know that first sketch was a mess, or that fourth one was a mess?
The first, well, the one that was a mess was the I think it was the third one. No, it was the fourth one. Fourth one, because that was yeah, I had a dumb idea, and I just wrote it out, and I'm like, oh, this looks like I wrote it out completely, and I was like, if reading this, it feels like I'm reading the sketch of someone who sent me a sketch, who's like, I've done comedy for a day, here's my sketch. It looked like this sketch of somebody who wrote me a sketch, sent it to me for mine, and goes, check out my stand-up bit. And I'm like, that's not even a bit, that's a sketch. You don't even understand how comedy works.
Was there anything usable in that sketch at all?
Oh, yeah, the foundation of it. Yes. But that's the thing. The foundation, and my knowledge, that I was horrific at that sketch. but the idea was there, and it got completely scrapped, and I completely tweaked it into a whole different thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, but the idea still was where everything came from. So it ended up being a completely different sketch than the first. Not even the same. Didn't follow the same plot line.
But you got to get that out.
But you got to get it out. And the thing was, I had written and I was polishing these other sketches all the while, and so that was one of those things that you scratch down, and you're like, I'm doing this before I go home. I have to finish this before I go home. And you did it, and it was like, oh, this looks like you had 15 minutes to finish this. You know,
it looks like the half-court shot,
which is fine
at the buzzer.
Which is fine. If you miss a half-court shot, you took a half-court shot,
right?
You know, and you're less likely to miss the next half-court shot.
No, you're still probably gonna. But the point is, you made the points before you had to shoot from half-court.
Right. Yeah.
Does keeping more balls, like when you're working on multiple sketches like that, does it take the weight off of the failed one, or?
I mean, when you're doing so many of them, you're like, oh, I got this to lean on. I could do this. I could just, I know at the end of the fourth night, I'm like, if at the end of the fourth night, I don't have something I can use with that sketch, I know I could scrap it, go back and write a complete new sketch, and still have it. I'd still be okay with submitting it in a packet.
Totally fair.
So it's one of those, and I also knew that I had like a couple days before I had to submit it once I got back to New York, so I could look over all these things. I could run it by some friends and get their ideas and stuff like that. So the ability to step away from something and just not be inside it and look at it from the outside is one of the greatest skill sets I've learned from comedy, because I record everything I do and I listen to everything I do. Okay. And it is annoying, and do I listen to it on double speed so that A, it goes faster, and B, I sound smarter? Yeah, I do. I do both of those things.
Does it make you sound smart?
It does.
I've got
here's
to
the
listen
thing.
to myself on 4 speed.
I will tell you right now, if you go and listen to Joe Biden give a speech on double speed, you're like, this guy knows what he's talking about. You know, you got to look, this guy is so sharp, and he is sharp. He's just slow. He's grandpa slow.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And I'm not a Trump fan, but he sounded smarter on double speed. He did. You're like, oh, does he know what he's saying? I'm like, oh, he's on double speed. What am I thinking about? You know, because I lived in New York, so I was like, I've known he hasn't. Since he was a Democrat, I knew he didn't know what he was talking about.
Do you so that muscle? Talk to me about how you prep for the special. Right, you're gearing up to tape. You've got this concept with an end. It's not just, I assume, an hour's worth of jokes that are randomly performed. There's a show.
Right. Well, there's a story. I mean, all of my stuff sort of, I like my stand-up sets to sort of have an arc to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily a full story, but like it's an arc. There's an arc. You walk away, you're like, oh, I feel like he just talked to me for an hour. I mean, hopefully you like, I feel like he talked to me in the funniest way for an hour. Hopefully you don't go, I feel like we were just lectured for an hour.
That was a very drunk TED Talk.
I mean, yeah, that was the most I've smiled at a TED Talk in my life. That's not how I want you to
walking to MIT or hyenas. What happened?
I don't know if MIT is what they go to. NIT. NIT. We walked. I think we just saw somebody give a speech at the NIT tournament. So I mean, the guy clearly knew his second-rate college basketball, but he didn't know much about life or math. But I do sort of construct it to I want it to all flow evenly.
Mm-hmm.
I've always since I started stand up, I've always been a huge like proponent of segues. Like I feel like I need a segue to get for. I literally when I'm going through and putting together a special, I like have a whole section of here's how you segue, and I work on my segues. Wow. I will go to shows and like my entire purpose of doing certain shows in New York would be to like really hone that segue
to build connective tissue
to really build the connective tissue.
Wow.
Yeah. So I mean like it just has I mean and look, I still have this sort of haphazard way that I have to be on stage with it. Mm-hmm. So like it's all constructed. But it still is sort of it's got to be in the moment. In order to be in the moment, mm-hmm. there's a level of like sort of playing around with how I deliver it constantly. So I go through and when I recorded the special, I'm because I know how film works and how I know how to do like I'm continuity purposes. I'm like anytime I take a drink, it's always at this joke and it's always I'm putting it on with this hand and still though I go through and my editor when he sent me the first cut of the special, he sends me each of the jokes separately, and so I can go back and forth between each joke, and every single joke except for 2 started totally differently. But like it was wording wise, I'm saying the same thing, but each time it was different. So it's weirdly each performance is an impromptu performance of a very strategized story.
Yeah, I think you've got this acting background, which has to influence your comedy immensely. Which came first, stand-up or acting? You were acting first?
Acting, yeah. Acting came when I was a kid.
How late did stand-up come?
Acting, that came after everything. I was an actor when I
That was your last one?
That was my last
Shut
one.
up.
That was where I landed, yeah. I was an actor. I had filmed a commercial. I had done stage in New York. I had written a play that had been performed in New York before I started stand-up.
Oh,
I had done sketch comedy and improv comedy, long form improv and short form improv. I had done every version of performance except for being on stage alone with just my words.
Oh, okay. So, all right.
And I didn't even know if stand-up was going to be that point. I thought it could be stand-up. It could be a one-man show. I have no idea.
Why was stand-up last? Was it just not something you entertained?
It was something I was terrified of. It was something that scared me more than any of them because I was like, that just seems so difficult to do. And in being in New York, we do bringer shows, and I don't know how much of most comedy scenes that makes up, but in New York, there's a huge market of bringer shows.
And explain a bringer show for someone who doesn't know.
A bringer show is simply that in order to do time on the show, you have to bring a certain number of people. If you bring 5 people, you get to do 5 minutes. That's sort of what it is. Some of the bringer shows in New York City were like, if you bring 15 people, you can do 5 minutes. I'm like, first of all, that's insane. That's not market price.
No, that's gouging.
That is
gouging. Where are you selling this? The airport?
There were people doing that and doing it and getting people to agree to it. And look, a lot of comics, a lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm the funniest guy. I have a ton of friends. 15's no big deal for me." I'm like, I'm funny, but I don't know if I'm funny by myself. First of all, I didn't do a bringer show until I'd been doing comedy for almost a year.
Where was your first mic?
First mic was at Ha Comedy Club in Times Square area. Terrified, walked in, walked out, like 4 times before I finally stayed in. Went up there, did the mic. First guy might have just been a dude who scrounged up $5 from begging on the street and came in there and just wanted to rant about his thoughts for the day. I'm like, oh, I could just be on the train listening.
Fucking pigeons, man.
Right. And so when I heard that, I was like, well, here's the thing. I'm not going to be the worst guy here. That guy's clearly won that prize. I was bad. Don't get me wrong. But
But you'd written a set.
I had. I didn't know exactly how to write a set, so I had written, but I wrote like premise. I was good at like ideas because I'd written sketch comedy.
When you come in an improv, you understand what gets a laugh.
And I could stand on stage for 5 minutes no matter what. I could stand on stage for 20 minutes and talk to people. And there'd be some levity to it.
Right.
It wouldn't necessarily be funny. I mean, I couldn't do it in between 2 stand-ups because you would have been like, "Oh, this guy's horrible."
Right, but if we took a bus ride together, you'd be like, "That guy was great."
If I had been hosting,
if you'd been our
a
waiter,
tour, if I had been your waiter in Times Square, if I'd been hosting a tour bus, I would have been okay. But yeah, I was bad, and so I really started going to open mics. To be fair, the first time I went in, it was I don't even count that year because for a year I didn't go back in until the anniversary of the first time I went in, and I'm like, I told myself I would do this again, and I haven't done it for a full year, so I need to go back.
Wait a second, you sat on this for a year. You walked off it. So
walked off.
Give me when you left the first open mic. You say you did poorly now, but the emotion then, did it feel good or did it feel bad?
It felt mediocre. I was definitely not the worst in the room, but to be fair, it was a room full of horrific comics. And so there might have been 15 comics because I didn't know it, but at the time, you could do an open mic at that time of day at 5 o'clock on a weekday. You could be doing an open mic in any of 40 different places in the city. And so this was one of those places that was not at the top of anybody's list. So I didn't get reviled by anybody because almost nobody even.
It's just kind of
like this is one of those clubs that is like one of those clubs that's known for being just a horrific club.
Yeah,
you know?
On its best
night. You're like, oh, this wasn't even like I don't even like at this point in my career. I'm like, oh, if that club approached me, I'd go, what can you give me? You know, like
right.
You know, I don't want to perform at your club.
But back then, that was your entry point.
That was the entry point, and I didn't realize that at certain clubs like that, like I could have after that first open mic still worked at that.
Probably
club
been
if I had agreed to work the door. You know, like you didn't have to be good,
right?
So I walked out of there just like I was glad that I did it, and that was the win.
Okay.
But I was like, I'm gonna do it again. But it just never. I was never inspired to do it again. And like I say, I was writing other things. I was doing sketch stuff. We did a web series we put together that never went anywhere, and my editing skills were so poor, and I didn't have enough money, so I couldn't hire somebody to finish it for me. And so it was one of those things that I was like, I just don't want to show this to people. So I probably have the footage of that somewhere, which will be interesting to watch again.
Wow.
But it's just you're trying to figure out where you fit in this world. And at the time I was still doing improv comedy. And every weekend night I was doing improv comedy twice a night. You know, I was doing 2 shows a night, and so I was
Right.
I was having fun. I was performing. I was getting some accolades. So it wasn't like I was missing this performative.
There was
thing
no,
in my
you
life.
didn't have your hat hung on any one of these
Right.
things. Does all that kind of help now in this? Everybody has to be so diversified and multi-talented and not just doing one thing. And you kind of got to know how to edit and shoot and act and perform and write and do sketch and maybe do, like, it seems like all of this diverse skill set seems so much more beneficial in this content-hungry world than it would have been when we first started, I guess.
Yeah, I got so burnt out on it that a little bit I had to fight. I'm like, I don't want to edit more stuff. I've edited so much stuff, and it was before editing was as fluidly easy. It was after.
It's all you can do it on your phone now. You used to have to.
It was still easier than it had been way back when people were like cutting tape.
When you were
and
actually
stuff.
editing tape. In the real.
I mean, anybody who's an editor that's listening to this, your job was way harder than what I was doing.
When I started radio,
yeah,
we were cutting and splicing tape to edit audio commercials, and I can't fathom adding a video component to that. When I look back at some of those old 60s and 70s, when you look at I remember seeing one of the first visual effects guys, working in sci-fi in the 50s or whatever, and the way they'd record, with walls of water to make it look like people were, you're just putting a pane of glass full of water and then having this guy act like a diver. And you're just like, and now kids are just doing everything on their phone. You're like, oh, look, an explosion. You're like, that would have taken a month.
Right. And what's crazy is this kid's doing it, and I don't know how he did it. That's what's crazy is I'm like, you don't understand the hours I put in to be able to be in awe of you doing that on your phone.
Does it get? And I had to get over this. But it comes back to the process being more important than the end result. But you do, and I know with Comedy Central and some other things, a Cowboy Explains, some things like that. Is there? And it doesn't hurt having Comedy Central sort of distributing that. But when you do a sketch like that, or you make something like that, is there a sort of a moment before you push it out into the world that like everything's hanging on it, or have you gotten to a point?
Absolutely. Yeah, there was I will say the first time I did it, because when I met with Comedy Central, I'd been trying to get like specials with them. I'd been trying to do stuff with them for ages. And I was like, I'm not who they're pursuing. Like I have tons of my friends have done tons of stuff with Comedy Central, and I'm like, I see who they're pursuing. And it has nothing to do with demographic or anything. It's just like, for whatever reason, I'm not their cup of tea. Whatever. Probably the fact that I use the phrase cup of tea. I don't, that's probably got some of it. People are like, oh, don't use British phrases like that as a Southerner. It seems weird. But I had a meeting with them, a general meeting, and legitimately in the meeting, I really feel like they were just trying to say, look, this is a general meeting. We're having it with you because we think you're a good enough comic, but we don't want you to feel bad for not getting any of the other stuff we're going to give to comics. Because I did it at a Clusterfest audition.
Okay.
Because they were trying to do a festival that was like JFL, Just for Laughs, at Montreal. So that's a big festival. They were trying to do a competing big festival. So I auditioned for that. I killed it. I had a great audition. But everybody on the show did well, and there were a lot of different ways for them to go. And I'm like, of course you're not going to choose me, because I very much am sort of a throwback character. But if you want a throwback character, you have the real people are still alive doing comedy and have been for ages. So like you could just reach out to them, and throwback is not where, society was at that point in time. So yeah.
A million reasons.
A million reasons. And because it's a casting. All of these things are a casting. So I'm not going up against a black kid or an Asian woman. I'm going up against all the other white men.
For that spot.
Yeah, for that spot. And it doesn't, and so, I'm like, there's 7 white men I could name you that you would be better off taking.
Yeah,
probably.
if you're asking me.
Yeah. So when we had the meeting, I very much got the vibe like, we're not really looking for you, but if something fits. So the first thing they throw out is like, oh, we're looking for female-heavy content. I'm like, I don't have any. What
was their expectation?
Well, I mean, it's possible that I was doing a podcast with a female comic or something, and I'm like, oh, we got this great thing where we talk about how, men don't understand women or something. But it's a woman talking about it. So, I don't know. Maybe they were, but it felt like they were sort of going, we're going to push you slowly out the door with each of these 3 things. And the second one was we're something with different world perspectives or something like that. I sort of have the standard American perspective, so I'm like, I don't fit in there either. And the third one, they go, oh, we're also looking for, stuff that's holiday oriented. And I'm like, oh. I'm like, well, I've got this character I do on YouTube that's a cowboy who explains holidays. And they're like, really? And it was in June, early June, when we were having the meeting. And I go, yeah, in fact, the first one I ever did was 4th of July. I'm like, and it's just a fun thing I do. It's just sort of me sort of repurposing history. And I had a pitch for it, which I had just gotten from describing it to somebody in a way trying to make them laugh. Was I said it was like hearing about the history of the 4th of July from a grown man who's doing it from the perspective of a third grader who's heard the story twice. So
it's actually not a bad elevator pitch.
Right, but I sort of had this really, and I didn't plan to have that elevator pitch. I didn't know that's, but like I had it in my back pocket. So when I said that made them laugh. And so they're like, all right. Can you, do you mind sending us a link to it? And 4th of July was one of those. None of mine did more than like 5,000 views or something like that. But comparatively, it had gotten one of the higher view counts, and it was one of the better. Like it was one of the ones that I would always show someone.
Yeah.
Because it was just that perfect brand of like patriotic dumb.
And you got the character right, the jokes are there,
right,
and
yeah, exactly. So I sent them the link to that, and they're like, oh, you know what? We should do this. And so like they let me do 4th of July to see if it worked. And so the first when I did 4th of July, we redid stuff. So I had to rewrite it. But we kept in a lot of stuff, but we added a bunch of other stuff. I found out that people who work at Comedy Central, they don't always know what funny is.
Well, so that was my question: is how harsh was once you involve them, the difference between the version you did on YouTube and the version that's out there with them now?
Here's the thing that was that I had to come to terms with. I'm like, they want this to fit into their mold of what they're expecting. So they don't want it to be completely yours because they're business people. They're about views and likes and money.
Right.
So that's how they're approaching this from that point.
And they
down
understand those elements, right?
And those elements they do. And I'm not saying there weren't funny people involved, but there were a lot of people who were just business people involved. Right. So I do it, and they're like, could you do this? And they gave me notes on everything. And some of the notes would just be like, oh, God. But I took each of the notes, and they're like, could you write another tag for this or another tag for this or a couple other tags for this or an alternative? Can we cut this line and do an alternative tag? And sometimes I was like, and if there was something that was a sticking point, I was like, because I still had my originals. I'm like, look, I'm going to put those away. At some point, they're not going to want to pay me to keep these up, so I'll put mine back out if I want.
Right.
So they do, and I found out that even if it irritated me, that if I just put my nose to the grindstone and wrote, that, oh, you know what? There is another funny thing. And some of the funnier parts of that came out of me rewriting things that I thought worked already.
The eye roll in your voice.
Yeah.
I recognize so I just went through this with a project I'm working on, and I was done in my head. Done.
Yeah.
And I sat down with two guys.
Right.
One of which has an SNL writing background, and the other of which is a producer. Both of which vastly more qualified than myself.
Right. Exactly.
And they gave me notes, and I took the call. And I got done with the call. And when I was done with it, I threw the notes in the corner. And I went, these people don't know shit. And I sat on it for a day. And I went, well, just play with it. Yeah. Just chew on it, sit down, and see if you can mock up just to prove that their idea is not right. And
so you set out to prove them wrong.
Well, in a weird way, it's almost scientific. Yeah. I just, with the hypothesis that I was correct.
Right. Yeah.
I forced myself a little bit unemotionally into the experiment.
Okay.
And I just went, well, let's just do it. I'm gonna prove my point.
Yeah.
And I started playing, and I started watching it, and I started just replaying it with this thing in, and I went, I'll be damned. I think they're onto something.
Yeah, and that's the greatest lesson I learned.
Because you still get to go put you on top of what they suggest.
Yeah. And the thing was, I was still the one writing the jokes. I was still writing jokes. So I'm like, I wrote these jokes, and I legitimately, a couple of the jokes that came from notes they gave me were the ones that got the most commentary, and they were my jokes.
But you wouldn't have changed them.
I wouldn't have looked for that joke if they hadn't told me to rewrite a joke. And then I have since talked with people who've been in writers' room, people who wrote for really funny shows, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's what you do."
It's
like you'll come with the perfect joke, it will make everybody laugh, and they go, "Can you write me 5 more?" 5 more lines to use there, and you're like,
you're like, yeah,
because that's what you do. You write funny lines.
But we're as the stand up in me is what recoils at all of that.
Piece
because
you're messing with my piece.
That's a hard lesson to learn. Yeah. Working in film and making things that weren't stand up is what's ultimately shaken that loose for me because my stand up brain left at its default settings. Yeah. There was a guard dog at that gate, Jason, and it barks at everything.
Yeah. Do not come into my yard to tell me what to write.
No, sir.
No.
I know what I'm doing in here.
Yeah. Look, I got my revenge. Every one of them died of COVID during the pandemic, so I'm kidding. No. But the project died of COVID. Because I wrote basically every holiday from 4th of July through of 2019 through Valentine's Day of 2020.
Oh, so it's not. What would you, given your, if you had your preference, would you rather take a concept like that and make it on your own and have 100% say so and have it have the reach it has, or would you rather work with someone like Comedy Central that has a lot of input and bigger reach?
With a concept like that, I feel like it's one of those things that I would rather have it have a bigger reach because it's sort of a sketch. It's not like stand-up is tied to me. Right. That is a character that I do. I do a character, Donnie Hoder, who's a Delco, which is Delaware County, Philadelphia, or Delaware County, Pennsylvania. It's a Delco accented character. He's a swim instructor who doesn't know how to swim. That's
What's the Delaware accent?
You talk like this, you lots of O's. Your O's are very flat like that. You're always don't go in water. Water it's almost British the way they.
I was gonna
water.
say that's like just
you can say water. Like that's British. And
that rhotic R almost disappears.
Yeah, you just keep the R in there, and you turn a British water into a Delco water. Yeah, well, that's one of those weird accents that I didn't know what to do with. And then when the pandemic came, my hair grew long, and I had this like bushy facial hair. I just one day I'm in the pool, and I had started training some people. Because I used to do personal training, and so I started training some people like on Zoom, and just to make money. I was just trying to figure out ways to make money. And so I had made this swimming video where I was like, how to exercise in a pool. Because a lot of people I used to train had these pools, and they're like, "Do you have any? Can you like give us some exercise videos or something like that? We'll pay you for these." And so I put out these pool exercise videos, and then I was wearing this like white bandana thing to keep my hair back, and then I was like, "Oh, what if I had just a normal bandana thing?" And then I just put a smudge of white on my nose and put on sunglasses. I'm like, "Here he is. This is," and then I'm like, what's his name? Donnie Hoder. Donnie Hoder. That's who he is.
And that's how they're
swim
born.
Teacher who don't know how to swim. Those who swim, swim. Those who don't, teach. That's how it works, right? So I made it. So like characters like that, I just funnel stuff through, and those are fun. Those are things I get to play with. And things
but the stand-up is you.
But the stand-up is me.
So this new special, you decided to do it on your own. And you've got, to be clear, you've got an album out, Force of Nurture.
Right.
You've got a dry bar special.
Right.
No,
yeah.
it's Nurture, damn it.
I know
I think
it.
I
So many people
that.
say nature.
Which
is fine because you know when I start spelling it, capital N, lowercase u, capital RTURE. Because
yeah.
I realized that, people don't see it. They're just reading it quickly.
It's like leaving the extra "the" in that.
Exactly. And so I'm like, it's not their fault.
Have you optimized all your SEO to include force of nature now and all the misspellings and all of the?
I should, although the
force of nursery, force of nature.
Yeah. So yes, but force of nurture. I'm big on the pun title.
I like and the new one is called Biscuits and Gravity.
Biscuits and Gravity,
which is great.
Yes.
Also,
and it's also my colloquial brand of wisdom. That's what I do. I am the character on the front porch, telling the young people, "Oh, you kids kiss already," sort of that. I'm that dude who's just like, "Hey, come on, can't we just do this? Come on, let's figure it out, guys."
So what's the so walk me through a little bit of how much did you have to take on when you talk about making a special? And I know I'm asking this question with a little bit of understanding.
Right.
For the average comic who's sitting out there, and I think now is a wonderful time to contemplate putting out an hour of your material as you'd like to, right?
Yes.
It's never been easier to shoot. It's never been easier to produce. All of that stuff, yet it is an enormous amount of work.
There's a lot of work that goes into it. If you are shooting it, it puts on, because I recorded it just audio recording. I didn't worry about shooting. I had somebody shoot it, and I paid not enough money, and it was a terrible version.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Oh man, they ruined the shoot. I lost. Terrible. But in recording it, just audio wise, you just have to tweak a couple things. In visual things, there's a couple of like every tweak begets another tweak. You're like, oh, in order to do this, this and that.
It's a lot of it's a lot.
Here's what I will tell you that I'm dealing with at the very end here is like the beginning. Figure out how you want to do the intro and the outro, like what you want to do, because I'm so used to be going onto the stage, coming off of the stage, and unless you're a big comic, that is not a good intro. Unless you are like, and when I say big comic, I'm talking like Tom Papa fill a theater.
Yeah.
You're coming out on this grand,
right
beautiful, where the stage itself is a character, and
the entry is a full.
Yeah. Unless your entry is impressive, which mine is not. To me, I was getting onto a stage in a specific space, and it was like, it's not impressive. So figure out how you want to come into the special. That's what I would say to you first. Yeah.
Have you figured out?
I did a sketch. I actually did a sketch about coming out of the pandemic. It's a sort of tribute to I don't know why. Rambo. A tribute to Rambo.
Not where I thought you were going.
I almost said Rocky Balboa. I'm like, that's not the right character.
You live in the woods and killed a sheriff?
No, I was in the woods, and this dude comes in the woods. He says the comedy clubs are back open. I'm like, that's not who I am anymore. So it's that.
That's Jason from commercials, Jason.
Yeah. A sketch. It was a sketch. And I'm like, we edited the sketch, and I'm like, the sketch does not, it's too long. And if you're clicking on it, I was like, this sketch is built for, this is on HBO.
That's what I.
And I'm like, it's not going to be on HBO. I know that at this point.
You need the retention. So
HBO told me shut up. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, oh yeah, I should have thought that HBO might have said no to this. I never thought that, it's good to be dumb level of unsuccessful, because you think you're successful until you get all the no's. Like, once you get the last one, you're sad for like a day, and then you wake up and you go, "What happened yesterday?" Oh, muffins for breakfast. And your brain just goes so.
So is that liberating though in a way? I mean,
not have anybody tied to it, to not have to.
Yes, I'm asking that, knowing it's. I will say, had I approached it from the beginning, which I will say this: I approached it like I'm going to make a special. We'll see if anybody wants to buy it. So, and that was very liberating, because it was just about doing what I wanted to do. Yeah,
which is great. And I would recommend, no matter how you're doing it in anything, even if you know that somebody is wanting you to shoot it. Set out to do what you want to do. Because I have a couple friends who recorded some specials in some big venues and regretted that they sort of gave up their autonomy in order to do it. And I'm like, you're so much more successful than me, but it's nice to hear that there are perks to doing it the way I'm ending up doing it. Not that this was my first choice of the way to do it, but
it's the way you're doing it.
But it's how I'm doing it.
Is there a plan now to push that in your own way? Like, what's your plan once it comes out?
So yeah, it's coming out through 4x3.
Okay.
And they've got a YouTube page that they put out comedy specials on. So they're doing the distribution part of it.
Nice.
Which is great because they've been real easy to work with. There's not this sort of binding thing which says that they can't put it out and I still can't have it all.
You're not getting
I'm not giving it to them. They're distributing it on their platform. So I'm
you're
giving
free to
them
do whatever you
I'm
want.
giving them the ability to distribute it on their platform. But by virtue of that, it will get me a lot more traction because we're going to coordinate social media and things like that. So that was the agreement. So it makes it easier.
Nice. Did when you did Dry Bar?
Yeah.
And they have Dry Bar is notorious for just extraordinary reach.
Yes,
I think you probably got
reach.
500,000 views or
I
something.
got close to there.
How does that translate to? Does the Dry Bar specifically? And I ask because I haven't done it. Does it translate to fans or tickets sold or to? I mean, it has to at 500,000.
It translates to a little. I got more people who found me. The difficulty with Dry Bar is when I recorded. Again, Dry Bar. You know when I recorded Dry Bar, right after I finished my last Valentine's Day thing with Comedy Central. So February, the end of February.
What a year of 19.
The end of February, 2020.
2020. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, that last weekend in February is when I recorded it, which means 2 weeks later, whole world shuts down.
Everything shut down.
So I am like, I get it. Nothing's gonna happen. It's just gonna take a while. So I legitimately just was like, I'm not gonna think about it. I'm gonna keep it on the back burner. I'm gonna check in once we're out of this.
Right.
In 2 weeks.
Beginning of March.
What I meant by 2 weeks was a month. What I meant by a month is 6 months. Oh, a year. 2 years down the road. Anyways, yeah. So it just kept. So what I did was like at the end of probably midway through 2021, I'm like, hey, just want to check in. How is everything? You know, I know you guys have had to go through some stuff. And I was really. And so they got back with me, and they're like, yeah, we got a backlog, but we're gonna get everything out. And so I'm like, all right, I'm not gonna touch. I'm gonna give them some space. So yeah, and it was just one of those things where it's like, I feel like it's not coming out. And then I saw somebody's come out who did it after I did it, and I'm like, all right.
Did I get shelved?
Yeah, and that was my thing. I was like, oh man. And then when I did put it out, I mean, Dry Bar is extremely clean. Like you can't even say, oh my God.
Right.
Like very clean. But of course, I am very clean, but I talk about very edgy topics.
Dark, yeah, in places.
I've got in both of my recording, my album and now my special, I've got a joke about transgender stuff. None of my stuff is like bullying or anything. It's very much in the vein of I'm trying to understand these things.
Yeah, it's a very innocent character you are on stage.
It is, and it legitimately goes to my thirst for knowing. I want to know what your world's like because I know that I don't understand anything but my world, and I've learned that through doing stand up, through having people give me notes that ended up being the best jokes in a piece. I realize I'm wrong a lot. I want to know how you came to where you were. So that's the tone of all of it. Is just I want to understand the world.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a joke about the Holocaust. I have jokes about race. I have a joke about the C word. By the way, I don't curse at all.
Wow.
But I do have a joke about the C word. I have all of my stuff. But in the Dry Bar special, my opening joke is about my white heritage. And then the other joke, which is, by the way, the joke they use to market it with, and I'm like, really? That's the joke you go with to your audience? I'm like, all right, but I feel like a lot of my other jokes would have really, and they also used I flubbed the punchline on my closer, and they used that one, and I was like, why would you do that?
What?
I'm like, you've had all this time, and I legitimately think I ticked them off at some point.
Oh, like they're doing
in
this
asking. I feel like in asking, and I feel like they just rushed it out. because like when this is how thorough I am, and I record all my sets. They're like, you can give us notes on how you on the set and what you think went well and what you think went wrong. And literally the next morning, I gave them an email, and these are like detailed notes. Every minute, this was better. This was blah blah blah. I
Right.
gave them I broke it down, and I'm sure they looked at that and go, "This guy goes, you know."
We gonna put every
I went to
flub
school to be
line
an engineer, and I didn't realize that the way it was going to manifest itself is just me being unbearable to record something for.
I've made this spreadsheet.
Yes,
I brought this CAD design.
It's awful. But because of that, I legitimately think that they may have just gone, I can't bother. Just finish this. You know, I feel like they gave it to somebody and said, just finish it. And then when they marketed it on the race joke and my gay marriage joke. And I'm like, really? Gay bar?
That's what they went after.
You're going to be gay bar now. No, and so legitimately, on those jokes and on the special, the commentary was either this guy's one of my favorites or this guy's going to hell.
No middle ground.
Almost no middle ground. And
is that their audience or was that the performance?
It's their audience. The performance, they went really well. Although there were moments where I did some jokes where people were like the laughter was good, but it was not like broad.
But you're taping in Utah in front of.
No, and it legitimately both shows went great. Really did. I had a great audience. They really were. But it's one of those things where I'm like, was the audience this tepid?
You feel like they turned them down?
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I do not feel like they made any effort to highlight anything. Like I feel like the jokes that they put up are maybe the jokes that played the most awkward for moments.
Do you lose any of that material, or is that just sort of one of those sets where you do that show and then you're gonna is any of this in your special?
I can't use that material. Legitimately, they put out their stuff relatively.
But what's the contract? They just have the performance, right?
They have the performance, but they have sent cease and desist letters. The way I view it is, I was doing that performance to put that material, which was on my album, to put that material.
So you repurposed.
I repurposed the clean stuff from. I mean, my album's clean, although it's labeled explicit. It's the cleanest explicit album you will ever hear.
Completely.
Because I talk about sex and I talk about my mustache being a porn stash. Those are the two things that I.
It is such a porn stash.
I say the word sex. No.
Ooh, you dirty boy.
I say the word sex and I say the word porn. And both of those are labeled explicit. The C word joke, not labeled explicit. The Holocaust joke, not labeled explicit.
Fascinating.
I know. So it's all of that stuff is just how they label things. All of my stuff is clean and all of my stuff is kind. Yes. I would say that. Both of those things. And so I took the cleanest part, but I did legitimately go into Dry Bar going, I'm doing my gay marriage joke. I just want to do it. I'm not doing.
They pushed back?
No, they didn't. But it they legitimately marketed me with it. So they market, and that was at the end of a thing about politics. So my jokes were, politics are dumb, but they labeled it, people who like politics are dumb. That's how they labeled it. They legitimately, I think, were trying to like stir up stuff. I think they were like, we want this guy's jokes to instigate our audience.
That's a very frustrating, because I forget
because it was so, I never, like, it's antithetical to what I was saying.
A bunch of female comics. There's a YouTube site that a bunch of them had all recorded stuff. This was years and years and years and years ago. And now they're getting, all the clips are getting put out, but every one of them has like a I think it's called chick comedy or something.
Could be.
Every one of them has some crazy hypersexual title.
Yeah.
And it's like, look at my tits. And it's like, she's not even, and the bits aren't congruent with that, but it's clickbait.
I had a friend of mine who had a joke that something about butt plugs. And she didn't tell a joke about butt plugs, but
that's
they put it out about butt plugs. And she's like, I don't even know if I've said the word butt plug.
Not together,
before.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where.
But these are people who aren't making art for themselves. They're taking other people's art and then repurposing it.
Yes.
And I think that vulturehood of how to get people to click on stuff, and whoever's in charge of crafting the first half second of YouTube story, whatever those parts are that loop and get you to click, and the science of that.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I got a 500,000 views
They
on
know
a
what they're
special,
doing.
so maybe it's because of that. I mean, to be fair, I don't know the business. I think we've clarified that. I don't know how to be successful at this. I just know how to be me at this. And
well, let's get you 1 million views on something you own.
That would be nice.
The special is called Biscuits and Gravity.
Biscuits and Gravity
comes out this month, March. Actually, you're always fun. We went to Afghanistan together. We've hung out. We're buddies now.
Yeah.
You and I have to say thank you. I've said thank you before, but when we worked together that very first week in Fort Worth, or it might have even not been the first. It was my birthday.
Was it really?
And I just remember you brought me a cake. You brought me a cake in the green room.
That's
on
great.
my birthday. I was a little bitty, and it was the coolest because I was just out there kicking it for my birthday. I had to work some material out. I was doing some stuff. I just planned on spending it by myself. I walked down to a Razoo's and eat, whatever. And you brought a cake, and we hit it off, and we've been all over the world since then.
Dude.
And
I want to thank you for taking me all over the world, man. It's always fun.
We've had a blast. I'm excited for the new album. Anything else you're working on or want to talk about?
I'm just trying to be better every day. That's mostly what it is. It's mostly what it is.
You're one of the best people I know, Jason. Your comedy is funny, clean, kind, and also apparently controversial.
Apparently, I am trying to put stuff out about. I'm going to start putting stuff out about Gen X stuff because I just have so much extra material that I didn't use in my recording.
Where's the best place that
YouTube.
YouTube.
I'm gonna put it out through YouTube first. So
what's the Jason Salmon?
Just Jason Salmon.
Simple.
Spelled like the fish.
Like
pronounced like I'm British.
The fish. Salmon.
Salmon. Yes.
Is bumlooker, cheeky monkey. Jason Salmon.
Classy as ever.
Hoder, whatever his name is. What are the
Donny Hoder.
Jason Salmon, my guest. Thanks so much for being here. I'm excited you're in Houston and hanging out with me.
Thanks for having me, man. This has been fun.